There are traditions in American sports that carry weight beyond the moment itself. The trophy presentation. The championship parade. The visit to the White House. These are the rituals that mark the distance between ordinary seasons and extraordinary ones, between teams that competed and teams that conquered. Every championship organization in American professional sports understands the significance of that final ceremonial step, the one that takes place not inside a stadium but inside the most famous residence in the world. The Los Angeles Dodgers had been there before. But what happened the second time was something no one had seen coming. And at the center of it, as has become almost inevitable whenever something genuinely extraordinary occurs in the orbit of modern baseball, stood Shohei Ohtani. The invitation had arrived through official channels weeks in advance. The Dodgers, fresh from another dominant season that had reminded the baseball world exactly why this organization operates at a level that makes other franchises quietly reassess their own ambitions, were formally welcomed back to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for a second consecutive year. Protocol staff who had managed the previous visit, the staff who still quietly talked about what had happened in the East Wing corridor, about the broken glasses and the baseball held with both hands and the young kitchen worker who had stood in the hallway clutching a signed ball against his chest, prepared themselves with a particular alertness that the first visit had taught them was absolutely necessary when Shohei Ohtani walked through those doors. They had learned something the first time. With Ohtani, you prepared for the unexpected. Not because he was unpredictable in the way that creates problems, but because he was quietly, consistently, profoundly himself in a way that the carefully managed environment of the White House was simply not designed to accommodate. Genuine humanity, it turned out, did not fit neatly into a 45-minute ceremonial schedule. The motorcade arrived on a clear Tuesday afternoon. The Dodgers stepped off in their formal attire, polished and composed, the way champions carry themselves in rooms that demand a certain presentation. Cameras lined the driveway. Staff stood at attention. The machinery of White House ceremony operated with its customary precision. And then Ohtani stepped out. The same protocol officer who had watched him arrive the previous year, the woman who had served through 3 administrations and said she had never seen anyone look at the building the way he did, was standing at her post near the East Wing entrance. She later told a colleague that the moment she saw him, she felt the same thing she had felt 12 months earlier. Not excitement. Not the fan energy that sometimes sneaks into even the most professional staff members when genuine celebrities arrive. Something quieter than that. Something closer to the feeling of watching a person who is completely at peace with exactly who they are walk into a room that is not always kind to that kind of peace. She straightened her posture without realizing she had done it. President Trump received the Dodgers in the East Room with the particular energy he reserves for champions, loud, warm, genuinely enthusiastic in the way that separates his engagement with elite athletes from the more measured tone he applies to most ceremonial occasions. He had followed the Dodgers season closely, he said. He understood what it took. Nobody won back-to-back like this without something special running through the entire organization, from the front office down to the last man on the roster. He worked through the team with the practiced ease of someone who genuinely enjoyed this part of the job. Handshakes, remarks, the kind of specific detail that signals real attention rather than briefing room preparation. He knew statistics. He knew storylines. He referenced moments from the postseason with the accuracy of someone who had actually watched the games rather than simply been handed a summary. And then he reached Ohtani. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Not with any single loud signal. But the way rooms shift when the moment everyone has been quietly waiting for finally arrives. Cameras that had been moving steadily along the receiving line paused. Staff members who had been managing the event's flow found reasons to stay exactly where they were. Trump looked at Ohtani for a moment before speaking. Then he turned to the assembled cameras and media with the timing of someone who has spent a lifetime understanding exactly when a room is ready to receive a line. He said that in all his years of watching baseball, and he had watched a lot of baseball, believe him, more than most people, more than people would even believe, he had never seen anything like what Shohei Ohtani did on a baseball field. Not once. Not ever. He said Ohtani was not just the best player in baseball. He said Ohtani might be the best athlete he had ever personally stood next to, and he had stood next to some unbelievable athletes over the years, truly unbelievable, but this was different. This was something from another world entirely. The room applauded. Ohtani received the words with his characteristic stillness, the small, composed smile, the slight bow, the complete absence of the preening that such extraordinary public praise almost inevitably produces in people who receive it regularly. Trump leaned slightly closer and said something that was not directed at the cameras. Something quieter, meant only for Ohtani and his interpreter. The interpreter listened, nodded, and relayed the words. Whatever was said in that brief private exchange produced something that everyone in the room noticed but almost no one caught clearly enough to report with certainty. Ohtani laughed. Not the polite, managed laugh of a man navigating a formal event with professional grace. A real laugh. Sudden and genuine and completely unguarded, the kind that arrives before the person producing it has had any chance to consider whether it is appropriate. For approximately 3 seconds, in the East Room of the White House, Shohei Ohtani laughed like someone who had just heard something genuinely funny from someone he had not expected to be funny. The cameras caught it. The clip would later be shared more than 30 million times under various captions, but the one that spread furthest was simple and needed no elaboration. It just said, "Real." The official ceremony concluded on schedule. Photographs were taken on the South Lawn with the precision and efficiency that the White House photo operation has refined across decades of championship visits. The sun cooperated. The flags moved in a light wind. The images were exactly what they were supposed to be, formal, dignified, historically appropriate. And then Melania Trump appeared. She had not been part of the official program. Her presence at White House sports ceremonies, while not uncommon, was never guaranteed, and her appearances always carried a particular quality of deliberateness, the sense that when Melania Trump chose to be somewhere, it was a choice made with full awareness of its significance. She did not drift into rooms. She arrived in them. She arrived on the South Lawn as the formal photography was concluding, accompanied by 2 members of her personal staff, dressed with the understated elegance that has defined her public presentation throughout her years in the public eye. She moved through the assembled group with the calm authority of someone entirely comfortable in spaces that overwhelm most people. She stopped in front of Ohtani. What happened next was described differently by every person who witnessed it, because what happened next was the kind of moment that people experience through the filter of their own surprise, and surprise distorts the details while preserving the feeling with perfect accuracy. Melania Trump, who is not known for spontaneous public gestures, who maintains a reserve in formal settings that is occasionally misread as coldness but is more accurately understood as the deep privacy of someone who has spent years protecting an interior life from relentless public scrutiny, reached into a small bag carried by one of her staff members and produced a gift. It was a book. Specifically, it was a beautifully bound edition of a collection of American poetry, classic works, the kind of volume that is chosen not for its commercial value but for its cultural weight, for what it says about the giver's understanding of what is worth preserving and passing forward. On the inside cover, visible to those standing nearby as she presented it, she had written something by hand. She presented it to Ohtani with both hands. The gesture was not explained. She offered no commentary on its significance. She did not perform the moment for the cameras that were still present. She simply extended the book with both hands, the same gesture, though she almost certainly did not know this, that the young kitchen worker had used when offering his baseball during the previous year's visit. The same gesture that Ohtani himself had used when receiving and returning it. Ohtani looked at the book. Then he looked at Melania. Then, without a word, he received it with both hands. Something passed between them in that exchange that required no interpreter and no explanation. A recognition. The kind that happens between people who, despite coming from entirely different worlds, suddenly understand something about each other that language would only diminish by attempting to contain it. Melania gave a small, genuine smile, not the carefully composed public smile that appears in official photographs, but the other one, the one that arrives without being summoned. She said something brief and quiet. Her interpreter was not present. Ohtani's interpreter leaned in to catch the words and relayed them softly. She said she had read about what he had done the previous year with the young kitchen worker. She said she had thought about it many times since. And she said that she believed there were very few people in the world who understood that the way you treat someone who cannot do anything for you reveals everything about who you truly are. Then she nodded once, and moved on. By evening, the footage and photographs from the South Lawn Exchange had circled the globe. Japanese media ran the story with the kind of quiet national pride that does not need volume to communicate its depth. American sports networks cleared segments. International outlets that rarely covered baseball found themselves publishing pieces about cultural philosophy, about the Japanese concept of the meaningful pause, the space between actions that carries as much weight as the actions themselves, and about what it means when two people from entirely different worlds recognize something true in each other without needing to explain it. One former diplomat, appearing on a late-evening broadcast, said something that cut through the noise of all the other commentary with a precision that made the host go quiet. He said that in 30 years of international work, he had learned that the moments that actually build understanding between cultures are almost never the ones that are planned. They are never the formal agreements or the official statements or the carefully arranged photographs. They are the moments that happen in corridors and on lawns and in the spaces between the scheduled events, when people stop performing and simply are. He said Tuesday afternoon on the South Lawn of the White House was one of those moments. And he said he suspected that everyone who had been there already knew it. The motorcade carrying the Dodgers pulled away from the White House as the evening light softened across the lawn. Inside the building, staff returned to their routines. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed. The machinery of the most powerful residence in the world resumed its endless motion. But in the small staff break room near the East Wing, the protocol officer who had watched Ohtani arrive 2 years in a row sat quietly with her coffee and said nothing to the colleague sitting across from her for a long moment. Then she said, "Both hands." Again. Her colleague nodded slowly. Nothing else needed to be said.